right, so on the last day that we lectured, I don't remember if it was Thursday or Friday, but we talked about birthing a child, and we talked about the stages of delivery. And what we're talking about now is pre-delivery. We're talking about as the embryo develops. And I said embryo, that means at the very beginning. So we have weeks 1 through 8 that we're talking about today. I use the word develop. The word growth means that organism is going through mitosis. So increasing the number of cells or increasing the size. That's growth. Development is differentiation, which means you're becoming more specific. Like you start off with arm buds, but by the time all of your cells differentiate, you have a full arm that has bone and muscle and skin, nerves, vessels, and phalanges that all work together. That's differentiation. Okay, you and I did discuss that term in 1406. I said, how many of you are going to be the class of 2019, seniors of 2019? And many of you raised your hand, a few of you didn't because you're juniors. And then I said, in 5 years, how many of you are the class of 2019? And you raise your hand because you'll always be that. But are you still going to be a senior? The goal is that you're not still a senior, that you didn't just leave school and go sit in your mom's basement and hang out. Like you actually became something and you differentiated. You took a certain path. That's what cellular differentiation is. You all start off as a stem cell. You have the same genetic material. But you differentiate into something more specific. Body plans. In a reference real quick to anatomy, we use the planes. So body plans, when we talk about all living organisms, we have to take in other things besides humans. So we have dorsoventral. What's dorsoventral? Dorsal is the top or the back, and ventral is the front. What's anterior posterior? Anterio-posterior. Top and bottom. And then right and left, I hope you know that it's right and left. Okay, I just mentioned what cellular differentiation is, where that cell is becoming more specific based on its genes. And we talked about gene expression in 1406 as well. Is there anybody who doesn't remember cell differentiation? I don't want to move away from that, because basically that's what's going to be the root of everything we discussed today. Okey-doke. Okay, here are the 5 events of embryogenesis, the development of an embryo. Fertilization, we've covered. Today we will do cleavage, gastrulation, neurulation, and organogenesis. What do you think neurulation is? I feel like many people can figure that out. Neurons, the nervous system forming. That is your very first system to form. What do you think organogenesis is? The creation of the rest of your organs. The very first organ system to develop is going to be your nervous system. That's what it's going to start off with. Then everything else will follow suit. The very last organ system to mature will be your respiratory system. Okay? So, neurulation or organogenesis, most individuals get. Cleavage and gastrulation is where I'm going to spend the majority of the time today. Just to kind of clarify what that means. Most animals, including us, were triploblasts. We studied triploblasts in freshman biology, and now we're bringing it back again here. Triplo just means there's 3. Endo, ecto, and meso. Where do you think endo is? On the inside. What about ecto? Ecto is on the outside. And meso, in the middle. Generally speaking, our ectoderm is going to create our nervous system and our skin. Our endoderm, the majority of our guts, so like your organ systems. And then the mesoderm is like bones, your connective tissue, and muscles. Okay, and I'm going to show you that diagram, but just so you kind of have an idea. Do you remember the term metamorphosis? Like throwback to 7th grade? We're going to use an example of an animal other than a human to kind of show you these steps, and then we're going to go into details with humans. Fertilization is what we discussed last week. Sperm and egg meet. At this point, technically, that mom is not pregnant. The baby is fertilized, we have a zygote, but until it implants into the uterus, the mom is not officially pregnant. Okay? Now, the term cleavage. Cleavage means it grows in numbers, but not in size. The cells grow in number, but not in size. The cells grow in number and not in size. Then, gastrulation is the 3 germ layers. So, endo, ecto, and mesoderm. Organogenesis is where we start to form our organ systems. And then it matures into an adult. Okay, so this is using an organism other than a human to show the 5 events of maturation. Now, I want to go right here real quick and explain what cleavage is. And then I'll go back to the terminology. So remember we showed the ovary and we said that the egg was released, it was ovulated, and it was fertilized here. Within about a day and a half, it starts to grow, but not develop. Grow means it increases in cell number or in size. Cleavage is the increase in numbers, but not in size. Can you tell me why I cannot allow this organism to get any bigger, increase in size? It will get stuck, 100%. So cleavage is the increase in cell numbers, cell division without growth. It's cell division without growth. And this takes about 12 days for implantation to occur. Then we start to see the growth. But it cannot start growing up here because if it gets stuck, either baby or mother is going to have to expire. That's what we call that ectopic pregnancy. So cleavage is cellular division without growth. While I have this picture here. Here I have this blastocyst, which is what we call it right before it implants. You're going to see the term trophectoderm. The trophectoderm is this outside. The trophectoderm becomes the first part of the placenta. Okay? And that's what it's going to say in the notes. I'm just showing you here. This right here, this inner cell mass, is going to become my baby. So we're going to end up calling that the blastocyte. We already said a blastocyst, but not blastocyst, not blastocyte either. It's blastos something, and I can't think of it. Anyways, it'll come in just a second when I see the term. What I want to get at is this open area. The open area is called the blastocoel. C-O-E-L. In an organism, we have the term coelom. C-O-E-L. E-M? U-M? I think. I don't know. A horrible speller. You already know that. Anyways, coelom means a body cavity. So when you see blastocoel, it's just talking about this opening. Okay? It's not a lumen because it's not in a tube type situation. This is just a blastocoel. So I want to point out those terms before I show them to you in the notes. So now I'm going back. All right, cleavage. Cell division without growth. Blastula. I knew it was something. Sorry, I let you down. Anyway, so repeated cell divisions. It goes from being a zygote to a blastomere. From a blastomere to a blastula. The blastula has the blastocoel. It sounds like a whole lot of Spanish, not Spanish, but academic terms that are confusing. So cleavage is the repeated cell divisions without growth, and that forms initially what we call blastomeres. So cells that are equally divided. Then those blastomeres become the blastula. And that blastula has that opening called the blastocoel. C-O-E-L. That's that space. Two types of cleavage. This first one is not for you and I, but I'll show you what it looks like. Meroblastic cleavage is what we call incomplete cleavage. So when a cell is supposed to divide, it's supposed to divide all the way through. Meroblastic says that it stops. And it continues to cleave, but it doesn't cleave all the way through. This happens in fish and amphibians, so that they have a whole lot of yolk left over. Fishes and birds, not amphibians. I don't know. They have a whole lot of yolk left over. Can you tell me why fish and birds are going to need a lot of yolk? They're eggs. They're going to leave these eggs. and that baby's going to need a food source. Guess what you and I are not going to need? A food source. So you and I have a holoblastic cleavage. We do have a yolk sac that does give us a minimal amount of nutrition, but then we get the placenta. The yolk sac in humans is actually used for blood cell formation later on in life. Okay, not later on, but like in that time frame. So meroblastic is where we have a large amount of yolk, and that's because that baby's going to have to be supported on its own without the mother there. The vegetal pole is where the yolk is. The animal pole is where the baby will be. So let me show you what that looks like. Right here. This is going to turn into the baby, and you can see that these are all about equal size. Here is the food source. Lots of cytoplasm, the yolk, and we want to make sure that that baby's going to be taken care of. Okay? Holoblastic cleavage is where we don't have a lot of yolk. This is what you and I go through. We have complete cleavage. We have those equal-sized blastomeres. Those multiple blastomeres will form the blastula, which has the blastocele. And right before it implants, we call it the blastocyst. Okay? So this is what implants into the uterus. The very outside of the blastocyst, it's not on here, is called the trophectoderm. The trophectoderm is the part that will burrow, and it will become the first part of the placenta. The baby's part of that placenta. Again, as I mentioned, this gets into a little bit more anatomy than we would focus on in biology. So that's why I'm kind of going through a little quicker on that. Here is the difference between meroblastic cleavage and holoblastic cleavage. This is you and I. All of our cells divide, and they're even, and they all look nice. Here is a bird or a fish, where we have the baby part here and the food source down there. And the food source, of course, is going to help keep it nourished. What happens if that egg runs out of food? That embryo dies, yeah. If it runs out of food, it dies. Someone last period said, so when you crack an egg and the yolk comes out, that's what you're talking about. The answer is yes. That is exactly what I'm talking about. The yolk is the food source. The white part is what would become the baby. Okay, that would be the cytoplasm, and that would lead to the differentiation. The nucleus is the yolk, and it has that genetic material, but once differentiation took place, it would program those cells to develop that baby, and the yolk would serve as the food source for that baby. So now you know what you're eating. So technically, the actual egg yolk with the genetic material, we would be eating the genetic material of that baby. Fertilization and cleavage occur in the oviduct. So we already discussed that. The blastocyst has the outer layer called the trophectoderm. The trophectoderm is what's going to implant, and it will give rise to the placenta. Okay. On the terminology, does everybody kind of see the levels of the words? I know that there's a lot of words. Actually, there's not a lot of words, but when you hear them, they all have the same root. It sounds confusing. So we start off with the zygote, and it divides into blastomeres through cleavage, and it forms the blastula. The blastula has an open area called the blastocele, and then before it implants, we call it a blastocyst, with an outer layer of cells called the trophectoderm, which will give rise to the placenta. Is there anybody confused right now? Nobody who's in it? I'm just going to assume, I guess, that you know everything that's going on. Hopefully. Towards the end of cleavage, as the baby gets ready to implant, the embryo begins to express its own genes. Can you tell me what that means? When the embryo expresses its genes, what will we start to see? We will see different features show up. Features that are unique to that organism. We call that differentiation. You and I are different because we express our own genes. Up until implantation, mom is running the show. Doesn't know she's running the show, but she's running the show. Once it implants, that baby expresses its own genes, and it begins to develop into its own individual based on its genome. And what's its genome? Nobody remembers what a genome is? It's genes. Genome and genes are DNA play into this? Genes. A lot of genes make up DNA. Yes. We're almost done, guys. It'll be good. Yes, genes come together to make DNA. Gastrulation. This is where I have my 3 germ layers. Ecto, endo, and meso. Gastrulation. Ecto, endo, and meso. And at this point, we don't see a ball-shaped baby anymore. We start seeing a slight kind of lobe, kidney-looking thing that will eventually differentiate into an offspring. Endo, ecto, and meso. The endoderm, it tells you it basically forms the guts, most of the internal organs. The ectoderm is the nervous system and skin. And the mesoderm is your connective tissue, which is like your ligaments, your tendons, your cartilage, your blood. All of that's connective along with your bones and your muscle. That's going to be your mesoderm. Here it also brings up the term notochord. Notochord, in biology we say this term a lot. Notochord is what will turn into yours and my vertebral column, our backbone. Okay? In organisms that don't have a backbone, they have just the notochord, which is just supporting the spinal cord. So you do need to be familiar with the notochord, that term notochord, and not just for right now, but you'll hear it again when you grow up. If you take other science classes. If you're going straight into business, you'll probably never hear it. I need to say that because some of you are not in science. Here's just a diagrammatic representation of all the different cells that come from those different layers. So ecto is skin and nervous system, meso, anything connective, and then endo, all of your guts. And we say guts because it's biology, and we're studying more than just the human. Next 2 terms, invagination and involution. Invagination just means a folding. This folding, is what we will call the blastopore. The blastopore can become one of 2 things. It can become the mouth or the anus. If it becomes the mouth, you're a protostome. If it becomes the anus, it's a deuterostome. You and I form our anus first. It's the very first opening that develops in our body. So you and I are deuterostomes, which means our anus develops first. That is invagination. Invagination is just the development of that opening. That's it. Involution is how the cells begin to form the mesoderm. And I'm going to show you a picture, but how they continue to grow as a result of that. This, where you just start to form this opening, that's invagination. Do you see how this, first of all, it tells you ecto and endo. Right here we start to form the mesoderm. So invagination is the opening. That's called the blastopore. For you and I, our blastopore is the anus. Here's involution. Involution is the spreading of that mesoderm. Real quick question. If this opening right here was our first opening, and it's our anus, can you tell me what this is going to become? It will. It becomes your digestive system. So your first opening for you and I is the anus, and most complex animals it is the anus. This is what we will end up calling the archenteron. The archenteron will eventually become the digestive tract. Okay? It is mentioned in your notes in a minute, so that's why I wanted to point it out. Involution is the spreading of that mesoderm across the ectoderm. That's all that is. So invagination is the form of that opening, and involution is the spreading of the mesoderm. Here you can see it's a little bit further along in development. Still doesn't look like a baby, but this stage is called gastrulation. Gastrulation is where I have 3 layers: endo, ecto, and mesoderm. And then, of course, here is the archenteron getting bigger, because that's going to be your digestive tract. Here it puts all of that into words. For gastrulation, our result will be the cellular arrangement of 3 germ layers: endo, ecto, and meso. That's all that gastrulation is. Here it talks a little bit more about involution, and it also tells you that our blastopore will become our anus. That first opening is our anus. It also mentions that the archenteron is going to become the digestive tract, and that's because the anus formed first. Here is a slide on the notochord. I already mentioned what the notochord is, but just once more. There are organisms in our phylum, which is the phylum Chordata. Chordata means that we have a spinal cord. The notochord has to be present in order to protect it. So you and I have a vertebral column that protects our spinal cord. That's what the notochord is. Next step is neurulation. What's neurulation? The formation of the nervous system. That's it. First system to develop, which is also why they talk about when a woman is pregnant, to make sure that she has adequate amounts of nutrition, because usually if she's low on folic acid, it impairs brain development. And this is usually before she knows that she's pregnant. This is around 3.5 weeks along, 3 to 3.5 weeks along. She still doesn't realize that she's pregnant, and the baby's brain is already developing. What this is going to go through is the steps of the neurulation. You do not need to know the details of neurulation, but I do want to show you what you kind of looked like. Okay? I do want to show you what you kind of look like. You were just a layer, and we have our notochord, which in you and I, our notochord is going to become our vertebral column. Just a layer, then it begins to fold, and then it continues to fold. Right here is going to be our spinal cord and lead into our brain. This right here is our skin. What layer is this? The endo, ecto, or mesoderm? If it's forming our nervous tissue and our skin. Ecto. Yes, ecto. Nervous tissue and skin is ectoderm. This is what it looked like at the end. You have your notochord. This is the nervous tissue, which will become the brain and spinal cord. Your brain at the beginning just looks like a little bulb. Doesn't look like a brain. And then you have your skin, your epidermis. Okay? Here's what it looks like when you actually look at through a scanning electron microscope. So it looks cool. I think it looks cool. You're probably like, I don't even care. That's okay, because we're almost done. After the nervous system is starting to form, all the other organ systems come into play. You do not develop your entire nervous system and then move on. They develop simultaneously, but the very first one to be initiated is the nervous system, and the last one to mature is your respiratory system, because you don't need your lungs until after birth. Organogenesis, and that's what that's talking about. Ooh, one thing I need to point out. Hox genes. Hox genes are your genes that tell your body parts where to go. If you have a patient or a child that is born with something where it's not supposed to be, it's because of these genes. If you have extra fingers, if you have an eye that's lower, or you're missing, that's Hox genes. Hox genes lay out your body plan. Okay? So, bless you. These are the genes that tell your organs and the different structures in your body where to specifically develop. They guide all of that. And this also mentions that your lungs don't develop until after birth. They don't function. They develop before birth. They don't function until after birth. I apologize. Okay? Impact on public health. This is the very end of this chapter. 5 to 10% of our population is infertile, and your cause for being infertile could be one of many. Common cause is untreated STDs. So things got really, really bad. You got a really bad infection, and now your gametogenesis, the formation of your gametes, doesn't occur. So it's damaged. You could have developmental disorders, meaning perhaps if you were male, your testes didn't descend, okay, or ovaries didn't develop the way that they were supposed to, so you just didn't develop right. So you're not producing the gametes. Malnutrition. Now, although this can happen in the United States, most of the time, infertility as a result of malnutrition is something we see in countries that don't have what we have. You guys may eat junk, but even a diet of Doritos and Coke will be alright. Not what I would tell you to eat, but you could still support a life. Okay? Malnourishment is really just talking about people who don't have access to the adequate amounts of food that you need to consume. You do have access to it, you just make poor choices. Some of you. Let me take that. Also, stress. Chronic stress can prevent you from getting pregnant, and it could also cause you to become pregnant. Because if you're on birth control and your stress levels increase, it actually kind of inactivates your birth control. And so women will get pregnant if they're experiencing something very stressful, and their hormones kind of override that birth control. So, but chronic stress usually prevents you from getting pregnant. So a lot of women you'll hear, and they're trying to become pregnant, can't become pregnant. When they stop trying, guess what happens? They get pregnant because they stop worrying about it. It doesn't consume them. They're not stressed about it. They just kind of go on, and when they let their body just kind of sink the way it's supposed to, they become pregnant. And you see that happening all the time. I know 2 couples specifically who had internal fertilization, or in vitro fertilization, and both of them had a beautiful baby. Tried for a long time to have babies, couldn't have them. Both of them had beautiful kids. As soon as the first kid was born, 8 months later they're pregnant with another kid. Because they got the first kid, now there was no stress of actually having a kid, and now they're pregnant again. And it happened the same way. Well, the first one was 8 months, the second one was a year later they were having. And it was just because you're not stressed about it anymore. What does contraception mean? What is contraception? Nobody? It's birth control. Contraception is trying to keep you from having a baby. When we studied this previously, we didn't call it contraception, we called it pre-zygotic isolation and post-zygotic isolation. Meaning, we tried first of all to keep the gametes from getting together. We don't want sperm and egg to meet. Ways to do that. Condoms, diaphragms, abstaining from sex. A diaphragm is probably something that many of you are not familiar with, because this is more of like your grandparents. It looks like a little flippy thing that you get in the 25-cent machine at CC's. But you have to have it custom made. You have to go to a doctor, they have to measure you as a female condom, and it's not used very much now because of the fact that it requires a high amount of hygiene, and there can be infection, and you have to clean it, but it is reusable. Nonetheless, you clean it, and then before you engage in intercourse, you have to insert it into your vagina and to cover your cervix of your uterus. Engage in intercourse, then you have to pull it out, wash it, sterilize it, dry it, and store it. Many of you probably not even heard of them because it's just not a thing that people use anymore. Most people do use oral contraceptives, which is birth control. We have discussed vasectomies and tubal ligations, which are trying to keep the gametes, the sperm or the egg, from actually making it to where they can become fertilized. Okay, and then of course there's abortion, whether it's spontaneous, meaning it's a natural miscarriage, or induced, which means you go somewhere and have that baby removed. Okay, so we've discussed both of these processes, but once more, a tubal ligation is where they go into the female pelvic cavity and they cut the oviduct, which means when her gametes are released, they won't make it to the uterus. And if sperm ascend her reproductive tract, they're not going to make it to the gamete. Does that make sense? This works out really well for females because they still have their gonads, which means they still release hormone, which means they still act like women. This isn't like a game stopper for them, where they need some type of hormonal therapy. For a male, a vasectomy is where they cut the vas deferens. They just cut the scrotum, put a little fish hook in there. It's not a real fish hook, but you get what I'm saying. And they grab onto that vas deferens or ductus deferens, and they sear it, stitch it, and we'll cut it, sear it, and stitch it so that they stay apart from each other. Both of these are probably the most effective way, besides abstinence, to prevent yourself from getting pregnant. But you don't want to do this and then decide you want kids and then have to go have it reversed, although it is a thing. You can do that. Okay? additional contraceptives. This is just showing a visual representation of each. Here's the diaphragm that I was talking about. I told you it looks like one of those things that you get in a 25-cent machine and you flip it inside out and you wait for it to like pop. That's what it looks like to me. I've got that since the very first day. I was like, what? And they're just a little bit bigger than that because, of course, as soon as I saw it in a picture, I was like, I want to see one in real life. So I went to the doctor's office when I went, and I was like, I just want to see what it's like. Just let me hold it, please. And that's what it is. And you insert it, and it has to cover that cervix completely. Then the male ejaculates, and then you have to go in and pull it out. Whatever. Okay, condoms, most people are familiar with those, and there's different types of those, and then there's contraceptive pills, birth control pills, different types of those. This structure right here is the IUD. The IUD is supposed to prevent pregnancy, and in the event that it doesn't prevent the pregnancy and you still get pregnant, it will scrape the embryo off of your uterus, and it'll induce an abortion, basically is what it does. It aborts that pregnancy. The IUDs are a tool that's used right now for about a 5-year birth control. It does release a little bit of hormone, but you really don't bleed. You don't menstruate during this time. The problem that they're having with these patients is that the endometrium is growing around it. So it's actually taking it in as part of the organ, and then when you go to remove it, it damages the uterus, which means that you can't get pregnant. And so you'll see these on those attorney commercials. If you have used an intrauterine device and you have not been able to become pregnant, or it has induced abortion, so it's not, because that's not what it says it's supposed to happen. It doesn't tell you that that's supposed to happen. They're just using that after women have used them for so many years. Okay? And this is the end of our lecture, our chapter, our semester. Stop. That's it.